No one expected what was about to happen when Cash Patel tried to humiliate Morgan Freeman on national television. What looked like just another high-tension congressional hearing turned into a moment the country wouldn't forget. The room was tense, cameras rolling, the air heavy with the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. The hearing chamber, all polished wood and political pageantry, was filled with aides, lawmakers, and reporters waiting, watching. At the center of the storm sat two figures. On one side, Kash Patel, former Trump official turned loudmouth commentator, leaning into the mic with a smirk he didn't bother hiding. On the other, Morgan Freeman, calm, composed, radiating that deep, resonant gravitas he's known for. He wasn't there to perform. He was there to stand his ground. Patel leaned forward, clearing his throat like it was part of the show. And then it happened. "Why don't you just go back to the zoo?" The room froze. Not a sound. A few aides looked up, stunned. Someone's pen clattered onto a folder. One person let out a breath like they'd been punched. Freeman didn't move, didn't blink. But Patel, he was just getting started. With a smirk and the casual arrogance of someone who thought the room belonged to him, he brushed invisible lint from his sleeve and spoke again, slow, smug, and sharp. "Mr. Freeman," he began, his voice oozing condescension, "we're here to talk about serious matters. Law, order, national integrity. So, forgive me if I have trouble figuring out what qualifies a Hollywood actor to be sitting here in front of this committee." He gave a theatrical shrug. "Other than your flair for dramatics and your Twitter monologues." Freeman didn't flinch, not even a twitch. He let Patel keep digging. "Maybe you can clear something up for me," Patel said, faking civility. "Your background, was it in film makeup, or was it more social media branding before you decided to get political?" The bait was obvious, the trap fully set. "Just trying to understand what expertise you're bringing to a hearing on legal oversight. America deserves to know." And then came the pivot. Patel's eyes slid to the cameras in the back. "You see, some of us earned our credibility through decades in national security, legal service. Others woke up famous because they threw a tantrum on TikTok." He paused, waiting for laughs. None came. A quiet, awkward beat passed, so he pushed further. "Tell me, Mr. Freeman, what's more important to you? Defending the Constitution or curating your Instagram aesthetic?" This wasn't a question. It was a hit job designed to humiliate, to reduce Freeman to a caricature, another celebrity with a platform and no substance. But Freeman waited. He let the silence grow heavy. He didn't speak to fill space. He let the weight of the insult hang so no one in that room could pretend they hadn't heard it. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. No raise in volume, no sudden gesture, just that deep, unmistakable voice. Measured, grounded, and sharp enough to cut marble. "Mr. Patel," he began, folding his hands calmly, "I understand your confusion. It's hard to recognize integrity when you've never had to live by it." A few heads turned. Someone muttered. A faint shift in the room. A shift in power. "Since you're so interested in my background, let me fill in a few gaps your research missed. I earned my degree in theater and studied the intersections of justice and storytelling. And while you were walking red carpets of political appointments, I was walking into community centers, talking to kids caught in a system that didn't see them. I've sat with families broken by bad policy. I've mentored young men thrown away by a system that only sees skin, not story." His eyes locked onto Patel, stone cold. "You may have built your brand shaking hands in the back rooms of D.C. I built mine looking men in the eye who had no one left to fight for them." A quiet murmur ran through the chamber. One lawmaker nodded, barely. Freeman wasn't done. "As for social media, I use mine to teach, to tell the truth, to unspin the spin, which is ironic, since some people here seem to have made a full-time career out of spreading disinformation." Patel shifted, not smiling anymore. But Freeman leaned in just a bit further. No raised voice, no dramatic pause, just facts, delivered like a verdict. "You questioned what qualifies me to sit here," Freeman said, his voice calm, unwavering. "So let's talk about qualification." He didn't posture. He spoke with precision. "I've questioned witnesses in real conversations, not for cameras, but for clarity. I've studied justice, not just in books, but in rooms where people's lives hung in the balance. I've worked with organizations drafting policy. I've walked into spaces where the outcomes mattered, where there wasn't a camera rolling and no one clapped at the end. He leaned forward slightly. His eyes didn't waver. Tell me, Mr. Patel, when was the last time you stood next to someone who needed justice? Not for ratings, but for survival. The silence in the chamber shifted. It wasn't shock anymore. It was attention. Eyes turned toward Patel. He shifted, just slightly. Freeman continued, his voice now sharpened, not loud, but deliberate. Because if this is a performance for you, if this is just another opportunity to insult people for sport, you might want to take another look at the job description. The room was no longer neutral. People leaned in. They weren't just watching, they were listening. Somewhere in the gallery, someone whispered, "Damn!" It landed. Patel looked down, tapped the desk once, then again. He opened his mouth like he was about to fire back, but nothing came out. Freeman folded his hands, composed. "I didn't come here for applause," he said quietly. "I came here for the truth, and if that makes me a target, so be it. I've faced worse. I've fought harder, and I'm still standing." Patel's silence didn't last. Embarrassment wasn't something he wore well. The smug grin returned, strained, not quite what it was. He leaned into the mic again, irritation laced beneath his voice. "You know, Mr. Freeman," he said with mock amusement. "It's always funny when people wear their past like a badge of honor, as if standing next to criminals makes you some kind of justice warrior." He shifted toward the crowd, milking the moment. "But when you spend your career keeping felons on the street, I suppose it's hard to understand what the rest of us are trying to protect." Soft gasps echoed through the room. He kept going. "You talk about law and integrity, but let's talk about who you've chosen to defend. Assault charges, drug trafficking, robbery. Are they misunderstood victims too? Or is it just easier to cry injustice when it suits the narrative?" Freeman's gaze narrowed just slightly. He saw it coming from a mile away. Patel flipped a few papers dramatically. "And then there's your social media presence," he added, holding up a printed tweet. "You've tweeted some colorful things, like this gem calling the justice system rigged theater. That's the same system you now claim to respect." He smirked, waiting for a fumble, a crack, something. Freeman leaned forward slowly, eyes locked, tone flat. "Let me save you the trouble, Mr. Patel," he said. "Yes, I said the system is rigged, and I'll say it again. Not because I hate the justice system, but because I've seen it from the inside." The air thickened again. "I've seen one kid get 15 years for a bag of weed, while another walks free after laundering millions. That's not justice, that's math, calculated on who can afford the better lawyer." Patel's eyebrows arched in mock surprise. Freeman didn't pause. "You think that makes me anti-law?" he asked, steady as ever. "I'm anti-injustice. I'm against a system that punishes poverty harder than it punishes crime. If you think that's radical, maybe the problem's not with my values. Maybe it's with yours." Whispers stirred in the gallery, this time longer, deeper. Even some of the panel looked uneasy now. Freeman turned slightly toward the room, not toward Patel, but toward the people who'd been watching silently. "And as for the people I've stood beside, I didn't choose them for image or convenience. I stood with them because no one else would. I defended them," Freeman said, his tone now lowered but firm. "Because they were people. Because they had rights. Because I took an oath, one I didn't trade for sound bites, likes, or a book deal." That line hit hard, and it was meant to. Patel froze. The paper he had been waving earlier crumpled slightly in his hand as his fingers tensed. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. The words he had so carefully rehearsed now caught somewhere between his pride and his throat. Freeman didn't wait for him to recover. "I don't run from my record," he continued. "I wear it. Every case I stood beside, every person I defended, every community I walked into. That made me better, smarter, more dangerous to the systems that count on silence." He turned to Patel again, gaze steady. "So, if your best move is to shame people for doing the hard work of justice, maybe you're not here to defend democracy. Maybe you're just here to distract from it." A ripple moved through the room, this time audible. Soft murmurs turned to quiet nods. A few aides whispered, others scribbled notes furiously. A shift had happened. Freeman didn't lean into it. He didn't need to. He folded his hands again. His voice softened, but every word struck with intent. "I've been underestimated my whole life," he said, "because I'm a black man, because I came from a working-class family, because I speak plainly, even when the truth makes people uncomfortable. But what you fail to understand is that everything you try to weaponize against me, my background, my voice, my fight, is exactly what qualifies me to be here. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was electric, like the room itself was holding its breath. But then came Patel's next move, his biggest mistake yet. Desperate to regain footing, he leaned forward again, this time with a sharp academic glint in his eye, calculated, cold. "Well," he said, voice smooth but brittle, "since you've painted yourself as a champion of justice and legal precision, why don't you walk us through the implications of Marbury versus Madison, in the context of modern executive overreach? Or is that a little beyond your expertise?" Some in the audience blinked. A few eyebrows rose. It was a classic academic ambush. Throw a historically dense, politically charged reference under the hot lights of public scrutiny and hope the other side stumbles. Patel folded his arms, already savoring what he thought would be silence. But Freeman didn't blink. He leaned back slightly in his chair, relaxed, still, and then came a slow, quiet smile. Not smug, not performative, just that, "Is that the best you've got?" kind of smile. "You mean the 1803 decision," Freeman said, his voice warm but precise, "where the Supreme Court under Chief Justice John Marshall established judicial review, the one that gave the court power to strike down laws and executive actions it deemed unconstitutional." A flicker crossed Patel's face. Not a full collapse, but a crack. The audience saw it, felt it. Freeman didn't stop. "Yes, it was a landmark case, but you're missing the point if you think it was only about power. It was about integrity, about balance, about responsibility. Marshall didn't invent authority. He earned it through reason and restraint. He let that linger. You brought it up to trap me, to make this about theory. But this isn't a law school classroom. This is real life. And out here, quoting case law doesn't protect people. Understanding it does. Applying it responsibly does. And I'm not here to show off. I'm here to get it right." The room was now dead quiet. Patel's jaw tightened. His hands moved slightly, like reaching for another line. But there was nothing left that wouldn't feel small now. Freeman leaned forward just a bit more for one final stroke. "And let's be clear, Mr. Patel," he said, voice low but undeniable. "When you throw around Marbury vs. Madison like a trivia question hoping I'll slip, remember who you're talking to. I'm not a soundbite pundit. I'm not a podcast host with a law degree they never used. I've lived this. I've studied this. I've practiced this. And most of all, I've earned this." The gasps weren't theatrical. They were the sound of people realizing something real had just happened. The room had flipped. "I practiced," Freeman said, voice grounded and unwavering. "I stood in real community centers, argued real solutions, fought real battles for people whose names never made it to TV. This isn't theory to me. It's lived experience," he added, voice just a shade firmer now. "And if you really want to test someone, maybe don't pick the guy who spent his life answering harder questions under heavier pressure than this." Across the table, Patel shrank back, not dramatically, but visibly. His once confident posture sagged. His carefully stacked papers remained untouched. For the first time since the hearing began, he wasn't smiling. The audience, no longer passive, murmured. A few heads nodded, then applause, scattered at first, then rising. It wasn't loud. It was earned, not for performance, but for precision. Freeman hadn't just passed the test. He had turned the exam around and handed it back to the one who wrote it. He let the moment breathe. His eyes scanned the room, from panel members to staffers, from board aides to the live stream operators in the corner. Every eye was on him now. Then he exhaled, calm, controlled. "By the way," he said, adjusting the mic slightly, "if we're done with the pop quizzes, maybe we can talk about actual policy. You know, things that affect real people." This time the laughter came freely, not nervous, not forced, cathartic. But Freeman wasn't finished. Just as the room started to settle, he leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking back on Patel. "I think the American people deserve one more truth," he said, and the air shifted again. Not a mic drop, a reckoning. Patel stirred, visibly uncomfortable. The power dynamic had changed, and he knew it. Only minutes ago, he had steered the conversation with smug jabs and legal traps. Now, he was boxed in by Freeman's calm logic and lived experience. His jaw tightened, fingers drummed nervously on the desk. Desperation crept into his tone. "I don't think we're here for a lecture on legal history," Patel snapped, a little too loud. "This is about current events, real-world issues. And frankly, Mr. Freeman, this isn't a courtroom. You're not trying a case. You're performing." A weak chuckle somewhere in the back of the room. It fell flat. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Freeman didn't react. No smirk, no eye roll, no interruption. He just turned slightly and addressed the room. Not just Patel now, but everyone watching. "You see what just happened?" he said calmly. When facts failed, he changed the subject. When the question backfired, he tried to rewrite the rules. And now, after setting the tone himself, he wants to pretend those terms don't matter. He turned back to Patel. "I didn't come here to perform. I came because this responsibility matters to me. I was given a voice to speak for people who rarely get heard. And when I do speak, I speak from truth, from research, and from reality, because they deserve that. They deserve more than cheap insults dressed up as questions. They deserve more than sound bites packaged as policy." Patel tried to interject. Freeman raised a hand, not to silence, but to finish his thought. "You want to talk real-world issues? Let's go. Let's talk about why millions still can't afford basic health care. Let's talk about maternal mortality in black communities, rates people like me don't just read about, we live them." His voice carried now, not louder, but deeper, stronger. "Let's talk about neighborhoods drowning, not just in water, but in misinformation, in defunded programs, in broken promises. You want to call me unqualified? Then let's measure qualification, not by volume or Ivy League degrees on a wall, but by results. Who's drafting the legislation? Who's still in the community centers after the cameras leave? Who's showing up for the people who feel unseen?" Patel's polished exterior cracked. His smirk was gone, his hands still, his eyes uncertain. "I've read your record," Freeman said. "The think tanks, the cable news, the curated sound bites. You've played this game a long time, Mr. Patel. But power without purpose, that's just noise, and that's what people are done with. Performers in suits who disappear when the real work begins." The audience murmured again, this time not out of surprise, but recognition. Someone clapped, then another, and another. Patel looked around, realizing far too late he'd lost the room. He tried once more, desperate. "This isn't about you, Mr. Freeman." Freeman looked at him calmly, then back at the audience, and without raising his voice, he said, "It never was." Freeman didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply leaned forward, eyes locked on Patel. "You say it's all noise?" he said, voice lower now, yet somehow filling the chamber. "Then maybe you weren't listening." He stepped forward, slow, steady, not for effect, for purpose. "You're right about one thing," he said. "There are rooms where decisions are made behind closed doors. And for most of this country's history, people who look like me weren't even allowed to knock." The room fell utterly silent. But here's what does matter. When a mother in Texas loses her job because she stayed home with her sick child, when a kid in Detroit can't afford asthma medication, when a grandfather in Mississippi works 2 jobs and still can't pay rent. His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from conviction. "You say none of this matters, then you've never had to live it." Now Freeman turned to the audience, to the aides, the press, the interns, and the millions watching at home. "I show up because I have to. Because people who look like me don't get second chances or legacy favors. We don't inherit power. We survive it." Patel tried to cut in, raising a hand in a half-hearted gesture, but Freeman held up a single finger, not to silence, but to finish. "And here's the truth you can't spin. Every insult, every deflection, every cheap attempt to twist my words or erase my presence, you didn't expose me. You exposed exactly why I'm needed here. You tried to discredit me. You failed. You tried to trap me. You failed. You tried to humiliate me." He stepped forward calmly until he stood just a few feet from Patel, and here I stand. Then came the line that no one saw coming. "You told me to go back to the zoo," he said quietly. "So let me remind you of something. We don't cage lions because they're weak. We cage them because they scare people who forgot. The wild still has rules. The room erupted. Gasps, applause, a standing ovation, not for show, not for victory, but for truth finally spoken, loud, unshaken, and undeniable. Patel sat frozen, smirk gone, eyes down, no rebuttal, no recovery. And Freeman? He simply turned, walked back to his seat, and let the roar of the room carry him. The moderator tried to restore order, but no one cared. The moment had passed, and with it, Patel's credibility. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a collapse. As the energy settled and the camera zoomed in, Freeman sat calm, composed, still standing tall. He looked around once more, not with triumph, with resolve. "They say truth doesn't shout," he said quietly. "It stands." And today, we stood. There was no speech left to give, but still he spoke, this time to everyone watching, far beyond that room. "We don't fight these battles because they're easy. We fight them because we must. Because every time someone in power says your voice doesn't matter, you speak anyway. I'm not perfect. I don't have every answer. But I show up. I read. I listen. I speak. For the people told to sit down. For the ones the system forgot." He turned slightly to the gallery behind him. The aides, the interns, the young faces learning how power behaves. In the end, intelligence, merit, and truth always rise above arrogance and manipulation. Always. The room stood again, not for applause, for recognition. Something had shifted, and everyone knew it. And now, as the headlines begin to spin, the clips start to circulate, and the noise returns, only one question remains. Was justice served? If you believe in standing for truth, especially in the face of arrogance and abuse, then this moment is yours too. And if you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or underestimated, remember, one voice, spoken clearly, can silence 100 lies.